Global goals for noble souls, transforming our world to a better wonder to behold. No poverty, zero hunger, for the elderly or younger. Good health and well-being, good education, empowering women to become sensation. Clean water and sanitation, is it not the right of every nation? Economic growth, inclusive and sustained, through industry, innovation and infrastructure be gained. Reduce inequality for sure. Make cities and human settlements safe and secure. Take urgent actions to combat climate change. Conserve like below water, land, ensure we do not estrange. Justice for all, oh peaceful and empathetic nations. Let us all partner to achieve these goals and provide much needed salvation.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. A very good morning, good evening, namaste, hola, bonjour, g'day mate, terve, and maraban. This is Namya Joshi, your host for the day. Welcome to episode 130 of the podcast, Each One Teach 10, An Amazing World of STEM, an inspiring venture where we'll be discussing that STEM is a part of every day for every kid. We all will learn together how to build that STEM culture. Well, today's conversation is very special for me. Many years ago, when I was still early in my journey, today's guest joined me on episode 19 of the podcast. Since then, she has continued to inspire me, educators, students, families, and communities around the world through her work in digital citizenship, well-being, and mental health advocacy. What I've really appreciated about Marialice is her ability to see connections before the rest of us do. Long before digital citizenship became a global conversation, she was already asking about questions that how can technology actually impact our humanity? And when the world began grappling with mental health challenges on a larger scale, she's been able to step forward to help schools and communities move from awareness to action. Well, today, as the Community Impact Director for Same Here Global, we have Marialice joining us, and she's helping create spaces where well-being isn't just treated as something extra initiative, but as something that is fundamental part of how we learn, work, and live. So, Marialice, welcome back to the podcast.
Namya, it is a full circle moment to be able to join you again and to think about our journey and when life really changed for not just us, but like collectively as a world in 2020. And that we had this desire to do something really special with that cohort. And it to think where we started and to join you today, it's just a gift. So thank you so much for the invitation to join you today.
Thank you so much, Marialice, for being on the podcast, and it's amazing to have you on board and talk to you again. So, one thing I found fascinating about your work is that you often seem to be ahead of the curve. You were talking about digital citizenship long before it became a mainstream topic. Looking back now, what were you noticing then that many people hadn't noticed or recognized yet?
Okay, well, I want to start out with a story. So I was a faculty member at the time. It was St. Joseph College in West Hartford, Connecticut. It had since changed its name to the University of St. Joseph, but at the time we were St. Joseph College, and I had been hired to build their middle school program um, at the graduate level. And then the state of Connecticut eliminated that license. And so I found myself in a situation where I had to reinvent. And so I was already going into the direction of ed tech and instructional technology, specifically for young adolescents. And I needed to expand my repertoire to now include kindergarten to 12th grade, not just specific to middle level education. And at the time, I had this incredible graduate student, Tracy Mercier, who has become a dear friend, a colleague, but she was doing things that were way ahead of her time. And what she used to do was she would invite faculty members and outside community to come and learn with students. She always wanted to create an authentic audience. And so I got invited. Anytime I got invited, I would go. But this one time in particular, she had written a grant for netbooks. And so this is a third grade classroom. And we're talking about 2008, 2007, 2008, around that time. And I arrive, and the group that I'm working with is on like the carpet area, and they all have their netbooks out. And they are happy to greet me. They're very welcoming. And as they're welcoming me, they're asking, how do you spell your name? And so I start to spell my name, and they are going mile a minute typing in my name. And as they're typing it into their netbooks, they say, we want to see if you're making socially responsible decisions online. And Namya, I want you to know, I gasped because I had at that point had never even Googled myself. It wasn't even on my radar to do that. And so I thought, I have no idea what's going to come up, but things did come up. It ended up being an incredible conversation with these third graders. And I just realized at that moment that what happens when these third graders, who just happen to have the most incredible educator guiding them, what happens when they go to the fourth grade, the fifth grade, middle school, high school? What happens when they're in my college classroom and I'm not able to meet their developmental needs? So the story behind all of it really begins in that third grade classroom with Tracy Mercier. And it really opened my eyes into what I needed to do differently. And so Tracy and I actually, this is like, 2007, 2008. Twitter was such a great place for educators back then. And there was this educator out of Florida, Jerry Cybrary, and he curated all of the ed tech Twitter chats that were happening. And Tracy and I needed to make an appointment so we could get the blessing to have the very first digital citizenship, which we used the hashtag DigCit chat on Twitter. And so it was like having an interview, really, to make sure, that this was worthy, that at the time we could find a day and time that would not conflict with other ed tech chats, because it was like so new back then. And so I'm really happy also to add into that at the time we were with Tracy, we co-hosted the very first digital citizenship chat. And then what happened, Namya, was like we just continued to add some layers. And those layers were Dr. Jason Oler, who is just an incredible influence and mentor. And because of the work that he was doing specifically in digital literacy and digital citizenship, I had the opportunity to meet Eugenia Tasmez. And that just like layers upon layers of being in this space and doing something specific around digital citizenship and around how to use technology for good. When I first got into the space, it might have really focused on a very reactive approach because we put the cart before the horse, right? Like we had the tech out there, and what happened was school districts were thinking, oh my gosh, the town next to me, they're, one-on-one. How are we going to keep up? And so, we'll go one-to-one and we'll start in kindergarten or whatever it might have been. And then there was no plan in place. And so if I was doing anything ahead of the curve, I really have to tip my hat to Tracy and those third graders for getting me in that headspace. And then I guess the work really transformed into that working with school communities, and not just what happens in schools, but what happens at home. And then what happens at home for those grown-ups to realize when they go to work, they have a responsibility as well. So it really became an intergenerational approach around how we use technology. And then by 2020, holy smokes, you know, the world turned upside down. We were all home, right? Everyone was home around the world, and we were learning online. We were working online. We were playing online. It was a really scary time. And I think that's the part where I started to make the pivot towards thinking that I think, you know, the 5 pillars of digital citizenship, one of which is balance. I started to specifically focus just on balance. And, you know, for your listeners, balance is obviously how do we make sure that we are unplugged, right? How do we make sure that when we are plugged in, we're mindful and we're not just consumers, but we're creators? And so I was in that space for a little bit, and then it wasn't enough. It was limiting just to talk about balance. And you know what else was limiting? Like, I think a lot of people in the digital citizenship space started to pivot towards digital wellness. Well, it's not, you got to drop the digital. This is something that's needed whether you're online or you're offline. And so, and wellness is a really large and broad term, and it just wasn't enough. So more layers in my learning that ultimately got to specifically working, well, relearning and learning, unlearning and relearning alongside Eric Cusin, who is the founder and CEO of Same Here Global. And so I answered probably 2 questions. I probably went a little bit broader than you needed, but I know in context you're asking about digital citizenship, but it applies along the way. And I've always liked to use, I know digital citizenship had their, I think they called them pillars. I always used to like to call them layers, right? But my life has been layered. So that was a long about way to answer that question, Namia.
I mean, that was really well put and beautifully explained about the whole journey, how you started. And I think that what really stands out in what you're sharing in those early experiences that you noticed weren't small at all. They were actually signs and signals of something much bigger unfolding. You were already seeing how digital citizenship wasn't just about reacting to technology, but about intentionally building layers of awareness, be it through community, across schools, homes, and even generations. And I also find it very powerful how you highlight that shift around 2020, where everything converged into one space, and it forced us for the better to rethink about everything. And if it is about, let's say you mentioned balance, so you're not just consumers of technology, but you want to be the creators. If you want to have safe spaces, you have to be the one who creates them. And that idea, of course, of unlearning and relearning feels really relevant even now because it reminds us that everything isn't just a fixed framework. It's something that we have to keep evolving with and keep learning and, of course, getting to push the idea forward.
You know, and can we just talk about 2020 for a moment? Because that's when I met you. That's when I met you. And, you know, it was scary. Like that time, there were so many unknowns. I just even remember watching the TV and the news about just so many unknowns. But here in the United States, you know, a lot of seniors were dying in senior centers, and it just all got really heavy. And I just remember, as a community, what could we do? What could we do to put something positive and also focus on, like, during these scary times, learning as a community? So we put together that global impactor cohort, and it was for educators, and it was only 6 weeks. That was like the thought. 6 weeks was like 1 hour a week. And it was educators literally around the world that showed up because it was important to feel that sense of belonging. And you were our only student that joined us. And it's a pivotal moment in my own educational career. But I mean, I don't even remember how it came about that you wanted to join us, but I'm so happy that that happened, Namya.
I cannot agree more. And now that you say, it feels so nostalgic and doesn't feel too long ago as well that I was able to meet you and, of course, amazing educators. And I didn't feel like I was being left out or anything because I'm the only student. It felt like actually engaging me more, and I'm getting to learn about the things that we need to solve together. And I feel it's also about being able to get that student and educator connection, where you hear my side of the story, I'm able to hear your side of the story, and then we find common ground of where can young students and professional educators grow together.
And
So
Namya, honestly, you probably taught that cohort more than any of the mentors that were there to like learn side by side. And what you created in Minecraft around the digital citizenship pillars, and then to think that that's kind of like a starting point. I don't know if digital citizenship was on your radar prior to that, but what you continued to do and then take those, I'm going to call them layers of digital citizenship, the five, you connected to the global goals. I mean, you constantly continued to learn and add these layers to a point where how can we make an impact in local, global, and digital communities? So this is really, we've been doing a lot. I might have been in the space earlier, but just even from 2020, we've been on in this parallel journey together. And it's really incredible to look at this full circle moment with you.
that is so true. That's so great to hear. Absolutely. Well, it's like really interesting also because many of the challenges we see around today, like in the world, are a lot around like well-being, connection, and of course belonging that have really tied the way even not just our physical lives but also digital lives have evolved. And I remember you sharing that the pandemic became a turning point in your mental health advocacy journey. So I'm curious to know what changed for you during that period, both personally and professionally.
Okay, so like I said, I think this is universal. It was a scary time for everyone. There's like the before the pandemic, right? And then I guess the after the pandemic. But this is the part where it becomes really universal. And I mean, collectively, we all experienced challenges during that time. I just happened to be one person who lost my mom during the pandemic, and that changed me profoundly. And I know I'm not the only person that lost a loved one during that time when you sometimes you couldn't even, go. This isn't me personally, but collectively, we weren't allowed to go into hospitals, right? Like if your loved one was sick or if you had a loved one that was in a senior center, it was like, there was just a lot of fear that either we were going to bring in something or we were going to catch something. And then even having the opportunity to have, a funeral. Um, I had to wait months before I could honor my mom. And I think that really significantly impacted me personally. And then, personally also as like a family, it brings up all these scary, that moment and extreme loss, things that you've buried and you haven't even thought about that really impacted you come to the surface like a volcano. And I found myself overwhelmed by the noise of life. And I think you probably know very well that I deactivated my Twitter account and Facebook and WhatsApp. And I even for like my inbox, I deactivated. I didn't want to be on mailing lists. It all became so loud for me. But during that time, I still was trying to do good things, and we did the Global Student Showcase. I don't know how many people would have known just personally. I think I probably showed up and put on a really good face during the time, but I definitely struggled, and then I happened to, in the May of 2020, I was invited to be on a panel for Mental Health Awareness Month through Beluga. Evan Schwartz had hosted a month long of events, and I happened to be on a panel with Eric Cusin, and that's the first time that I met Eric. And there were obviously other people on that panel, but I can't tell you who else was on that panel, because I was like, my personal and my professional lives are at a crossroad. His messaging was incredible. And I remember reaching out to him after and saying, thank you so much. This was really fortuitous that I was I used to Casablanca. I'm going to age myself here. You probably don't know this line from a movie, Casablanca movie, but it was like, of all the gin joints in all the world, it's like that famous movie line from Casablanca. But of all the panels in all the world, I happened to be in this, I got to meet Eric Cusin. That's how I feel. And I spent a lot of time unlearning, relearning, because unfortunately, we have all been, the media, we've talked about consuming, we've all consumed language that divides us, that's reactive, that is clickbait, that sensationalizes things. And Eric was so instrumental in helping me go from a reactive to a proactive approach in the mental health space. And if people are not already following Same Here Global, he also, whether he realizes it intentionally or not, it's like media literacy lessons, because he calls out newspaper articles. So the best thing that you could do as a takeaway from our conversation is to follow Same Here Global on all social media channels. But in many ways, I'm going to just tie this back. I'm going to go backwards a little bit to digital citizenship. When I got into that space, it was very reactive, right? And I wanted to swing the pendulum and bring it into a proactive. And it started with language in the digital citizenship space. And when I would work with school communities, I would do an audit, and we'd look at their policies, and we'd look at, any programs that are in place. And it was like you were evaluating the language that was used. And a lot of times it would be like those policies were, don't do this, don't do that. And, to help school communities go from that to, how about I will statements, from that reactive to the proactive. And so in many ways, I just want to say, I'm still doing this like very similar work, because in the mental health space, it's very divisive. It's, if you just look at how the media talks about it, it's us versus them. Either you have a label, you have a diagnosis, or like, and if that's, oh geez, I don't want that, and their message about 1 in 5 of us have a mental illness. Well, actually, no, like 5 in 5 of us have mental health. And so if anybody listening doesn't know about Same Here Global, it's all inspired by American Sign Language. So this is for American Sign Language, it's your thumb and your pinky. This is Same Here. And so when we think about 5 and 5, instead of looking at things in labels, I'm going to ask, have you ever experienced betrayal in your life? This is to you, Namya. This is to your audience. Guess what? Same here. Have you ever experienced loss in your life? Same here. So when you think about human emotions and the range of them, We all fluctuate back and forth. And so that is why I professionally made this pivot, because I feel so passionately that this also is very intergenerational, like the digital citizenship work, that this is important in schools, at home, and then that those grown-ups at home realize another layer, another ripple, that they have a responsibility at home, at work as well. So that's a long way of kind of explaining that same here, and that this is something collectively about being human that we all experience. And I think that to tie back to why I had to go quiet for a while is that my nervous system was like a 10 alarm fire. And they talk about fight or flight, and I would go into freeze mode, and I'm working through those things. And so, Namia, for a while, and we can be honest on this call, you didn't hear from me. And that might have been, you might have thought, and I hope you didn't, that it was something that you did. I don't know, like how you interpreted it.
And like, because I knew that things have been hard for you, so that's why I feel like I have learned this thing, that you need to learn how to give people their space, because if they're in that zone where they're self-reflecting, they will come back to you, and you did when I reached out.
Yes. And so
I
it's
did not
like,
think about it that anyway.
I'm really glad to hear that, because, thinking about the time before and the time after sounds like a bad sci-fi movie, but I changed because of all of it. And I can't necessarily go back to that. I was really happy-go-lucky to go to conferences. I'd be the first one whistling, and people would say they would hear me before they would see me. I'm now a little bit more subdued. Like, I'm just not that. I mean, at the core, in my heart, I'm still doing this work, but I can't go back to what it was like before times. And to meet people now and going forward, it's a balancing. It's all a balancing act. And I hope that by being transparent, and if you ever hear Eric Cusin's story, in fact, Nami, if you ever wanted to have him on your podcast, his story is really so inspirational. It happened before the pandemic. I'll just give a quick preview. And I'm not even going to do it justice, but before the pandemic, he was a sports executive in the front office. I can't remember if it was the NBA or the NHL, but he definitely worked with different organizations throughout his career. And one day he couldn't get out of bed. And then that one day turned into over 2 years. And I feel like 50, 60 different types of medicine. I think they shocked his brain 3 times. And ultimately, all of these professionals said that they were at the end of the line. There wasn't anything left that they could do to help him. And, when you are in a depressive and you have suicidal ideations and you have all these professionals saying, this is the end of the line, there's nothing else we can do, you're resistant to therapy. The next professional that says, I need you to commit to a 45-day breathing retreat, you've got nothing else to lose. So Eric went on a 45-day breathing retreat. I think the way he tells the story, he was the only man. And I think he tells a story that, like, I don't know, somewhere in like day 30, he woke up and for the first time he had a desire for scrambled eggs. And as simple as that is, right? A desire for, when you haven't had any of those, you haven't desired anything in over 2 years. He just saw the value behind bringing your brain to the gym. And so that's where I know that this conversation is going to lead, is into that STAR gym for the brain. And he has this unbelievable network, global network of professionals, and the science behind it. Just like we bring our body to the gym, we need to bring our brain to the gym. And so I'm really proud to be part of that advocacy and help other communities literally around the world, because this is so universal.
That is so true. Like we were discussing about Project Hail Mary before this, and that like it talks about you have to find someone to be brave for, and that someone can be you as well. That you find yourself in a zone that you be brave for yourself, because I think when you talk about, I think caring about things around you, it starts like there's this sentence: charity begins from home. You are your own home. When you're able to take care of yourself, when you're able to love yourself, and when you understand yourself, that is when you can understand things around you. So I think it just ties a lot to that part, that you need to be brave for yourself, you need to care for yourself so that you can care for things around you personally, and of course then professionally as well. And I think what you've shared is incredibly human and deeply universal as well, that the pandemic really was a collective experience, but the way it intersected for you at your personal loss, especially not being able to honor your mother in the way that you wanted to, adds like such a profound layer to the journey. And I also hear that period wasn't just about advocacy, but about carrying a heavy internal struggle for yourself, while of course still showing up and creating the meaningful spaces like you always do. But what really stands out is that shift that you described, that you're going from a more reactive space to something that is more intentional and proactive, and something that you relate to, that comes out directly from heart, and going from, to those I will statements, and having a more constructive approach that feels incredibly important as well. So it's again like being able to respond to crisis, not just about them, but being able to transform how we engage with mental health altogether.
And I think that to realize that I wasn't alone in it, that this is a human experience that obviously has happened for generations and generations and generations, but specifically during the pandemic, that loss for others, um, and that we collectively had to navigate the loss of a loved one in a way that hadn't been done previously, that we didn't, other generations might not have had to, delay a burial, um, or a funeral because of the situation of COVID and the pandemic. So I think all of that is what kind of was able to fuel me to continue this whole idea of being human, because the work in the digital citizenship space has always been, how do we find moments where you can see the human sitting next to you? Because if you can't humanize the person sitting next to you, you can't apply it to people around the world that might look different, might speak different languages, might practice different customs or traditions. And so if you can't apply it to the person next to you or the person around the world, then you'll never be able to see the human across the screen. And in all of it, it's all really deeply connected to that transition that I made into this mental health space.
Absolutely. And that shift eventually led you to work in that space that is impacting communities now around the world. So today you're working with Same Here Global. Mental health programs have existed in schools for years, but your approach feels different. I want to know what makes Same Here's philosophy unique.
Okay, it's so inclusive. First, from the get-go, that it's been inspired, the name Same Here Global is inspired by American Sign Language. Immediately, like, you are invited, everyone is invited into this space. The idea of changing that 1 in 5 to 5 in 5 is just one more layer about being inclusive. Um, and I got to see Eric during the pandemic, um, at a private school, which did not close down in the United States. a lot of public schools, everyone was virtual, but this private school didn't close down, and he came and he did an assembly, and that's the first time I saw his school program, and it was so profound, and the message applies to literally everyone. And it makes you feel like, while I was there, I was like, I don't feel alone in all of this. There's that larger community, and even though our stories might be different and our challenges might be different, it still connects us as a community. And so what's different is there are a lot of programs out there and a lot of focus on social emotional learning, and all of them, it's like the digital citizenship space. You meet people where they are. If they have programs in place, that's fantastic. Like, really, honestly, good. I'm so happy that you have something in place. But all of it, whatever the program is, there's an extension, an easy extension to add in this same here global mission and messaging and programming. Because what Same Here Global does differently is they have an app. So there is an app for Same Here. It's called the Same Here Scale app. And what that app does is it helps to track and act on your mental health. So no matter where we live, right? This hits the whole human race. We can go to see a doctor, and the doctor can take our temperature or put a blood pressure cuff on or ask us to get on a scale, right? There are measurable things that when we go to see a medical doctor, that we are tracking and acting on our physical health, right? Well, what this app does is it helps to track. It's the first app. So the first program that you are able to track and act on your mental health. And so you start to see trends and you start to see patterns. And the goal isn't that, we're always on one end of the scale, but the goal is that we know and we have tools in our toolbox that can help us regulate, and that we can get out of different zones or different parts of this scale, that we can do it on our own. And all we need is that tool to help us see where we are on the scale, and then these brain gym exercises, right? Bringing your brain to the gym, that will help regulate us, or help get us from dysregulation into regulation. That's the goal, not to always be rah, rah, shish kumbah, but that we know how to, I don't even know where I came up with that expression. But anyways, sounds like a thing my mom would have said, by the way, rah, rah, shish kumbah. But that is what really makes Same Here Global different, is it is so inclusive that you can see yourself in this story, and you can see that you need to work on, just like you would bring your body to the gym, like we all need collectively. It doesn't have to be a capital T trauma to bring your brain to the gym.
Again, I feel like that's really compelling, the way you describe how Same Here is different entirely from the narrative from 1 in 5 to 5 in 5, and that alone reframes mental health from something that affects a few to something that includes all of us, and that really makes it more human and less isolating. I like how you emphasized on the sense of inclusivity, that everyone is welcome into the conversation, not just the ones who are visibly struggling or not visibly struggling from it. And of course, the other piece that stands out, of course, is the idea of actually tracking mental health, almost the way we track physical health. And I think that's feeling like a very big shift from just having abstract conversations to something that's more tangible, where you can see where you are, you regulate yourself, and you move to different zones with awareness. And that really positions mental health not just as a crisis response, fight or flight, but as in like an ongoing, measurable, proactive practice.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. So, one initiative that you also talked about now is the Star Gym for the Brain. And it is such an interesting concept because it treats mental fitness almost like physical fitness. So, what impact have you seen on educators who have experienced it?
Okay, this is the part that I'm really helping to lead for Same Here, is to bring the Star Gym for the Brain to conferences and to communities, whether those are going to be school communities or they're going to be workplaces, because again, this is that intergenerational. It doesn't just happen at school, it happens, everywhere. And so these experiences, these learning experiences should be available to everyone. And so last January, we hosted our very first one at at FETC conference, and we partnered with a design specialist. So from Flagler Schools, um, the learning design specialist designed the space. We had a dedicated space. We partnered with 3 furniture companies, and we did this really collaboratively with the mission about Same Here and the Gym for the Brain. And the way that you were able to experience it at FETC was you could experience the room itself, the gym, the space, but you could also experience it when speakers came in and speakers were utilizing that space. So I know Lori Guion, right? Really, really well. Lori, and also Matt, by the way. So both of them, I'll use them both as an example. So shout out to both Lori and to Matt. They were presenters in that space. And they they changed their presentation style because of the space, and it was really, really effective. So those were 2 different ways at FETC. But I can tell you, to go back to like the impact on adults, we had what we called like an open gym. So when there weren't presenters, you could just come and experience the room. Or actually, I'm going to call it not just the room, the gym. And the reason why it's the gym is that that's also very intentional. Talk about words matter. A gym is accessible to everyone. You could be working out on a treadmill or a bike or whatever next to an elite athlete on one side, and on the other side, someone that has come to the gym for the very first time. So it was intentionally called the Gym for the Brain. Anyways, we had these open gym slots, and it was the last day of a 4-day conference. And it was the last session on that 4th day. And I thought, geez, I've gone to a lot of conferences. You try to, you're you've just got so much unbelievably incredible feelings and knowledge and connections with people, but you try to sneak out a little bit early from conferences, get to the airport, get yourself home. So I wasn't expecting it to be busy on that last session, but all these people came, and they came intentionally because they'd already been to the space before, but they knew they were going to the airport or they were getting ready for their travel back home, and they wanted to make sure that they actually had that opportunity to regulate themselves before leaving the conference. And that, to me, there's one woman in particular, and I asked her if I could take a video testimony and what she was experiencing and how she was feeling prior to coming into the space, and the reason why she came to the space to help regulate that is the reason why this is something that we all collectively need. So I know that we're going to the MassQ conference. We're not going to be in a dedicated room. We're actually going to be in a foyer, in a mezzanine. This is going to be in October. And we are partnered with a furniture company, and it will be, I don't know, this will be different. It's different than, a unique room and space. I feel like this will allow a lot more visibility. I mean, I think at FETC, unless you specifically were coming to our room, you might not have known about it. But it'll be interesting to see in October what changes because of this mezzanine space, this very open space. And what's exciting is MassQ is held at Gillette Stadium, and that might not necessarily mean anything to you specifically, but that's where the New England Patriots play. And it's a really cool venue, Namya, because wherever you are in the conference center, you are looking inside the field. And so Eric will be there. I'll be there. And then we have a former New England Patriot player and Super Bowl champion, Dominique Easley, who will also be there. And we are going to be guiding you through like these, brain gym exercises. And so I feel, to tie this back to your question, it's like that old saying that we need to put the oxygen mask on first before we can help others. And going to conferences for educators, if educators aren't focusing on their own mental health, they're not going to be able to be as impactful in helping students, because like I was describing before, your own nervous system could be at a 10 alarm, and you can still show up and try to fake it till you make it. And people, for the most part, might not know just how hard things are. But this is why we want to bring this type of learning to all school communities, literally around the world.
Absolutely. And what really stands out here is how intentionally immersive that experience is. That you're not just talking about mental fitness, you're actually getting them to come and step into it and bringing like the Star Gym into conference experiences and spaces, and even designing the environment with learning specialists and physical setup makes it feel so much more real and not just something that you can talk about in theory. And I love that the parallel with the gym, it immediately, signals accessibility and normalizes the idea that everyone can work on their mental fitness together no matter where they come from. And the fact that educators decided to show up, especially in those final moments, like you were mentioning, to regulate themselves before heading out, that says a lot. It really shows that there's a need for these spaces. And when given the opportunity, people are not just open to it, they actually actively seek out for it. So, yes.
And, I would love to see you actually present in the space. So there were some presenters that were not able to, you're used to when you go to present, there's like rows, right? That's just the way conferences are set up. And you kind of, unfortunately, it's a lot of stand and deliver. And I mentioned Lori and Matt because they made it really interactive and with the specific way that the gym had been set up, with flexible seating. And I have to tell you, I learned so much from, it's Joey DePuma from Flagler Schools as a learning design specialist about whether it was color, it was sensory, for the touch, it was the lighting. I mean, everything. There were so many pieces that I've never even thought about that go into designing a learning space. But like Matt and Lori were incredible to say, okay, how I usually present at a conference, that's not going to work here. And they engaged, the people that showed up for their session. So I actually would love to see you, because I think you would really just you'd be like, in fact, the next time I go to a conference, if it's not like this isn't going to work for me. Rows aren't going to work for me anymore. So
do that.
Yes. So the only thing at MassQ I can tell you that will be different is we won't have presenters in this space like we did, because we're out in the, so it's just really exciting to bring this type of learning experience to communities to move the needle forward in a really positive way. So I hope that we're going to be in the same place at the same time, Namya, at a conference, that we could do this collectively together.
And that is manifested today. It's
yes
about time that it happens soon.
In fact, I just want to even think about, going back, you were at Bet UK. I was not at Bet UK, but I found out that Manny was going to be at Bet UK. And I remember packing something and I sent it to him and he put it in a suitcase to give to you, so I could feel like I was there with you. So
I still remember like the amazing award and the absolutely delicious chocolates, and I still have the card with me in my
I love it. And so for everybody, it was I saw wicked. And if you know anything about being from Boston, we use the word wicked like people use ketchup, right? Extra ketchup on everything. We add wicked to everything. When I saw the wicked, I think it was called Wicked Good chocolate, I was like,
Yeah.
I've got to send that to Namia. But honestly, we've never met in person. It's all so we're due. We're due, Namia.
Yes, absolutely. We so are. Amazing. And that actually brings up us to a question that I think many listeners may be asking themselves. If a school leader, teacher, or administrator is listening today and thinking, we want to do better when it comes to well being, where should they begin?
Okay, I'm going back to my digital citizenship work, and you have to start with language. Go look at your policies that are in place. Look at what, even look at your social media feed and what is being posted online about mental health. What are your messaging? Go and look at it, invite all of your school counselors really to take that very constructive approach into what the programs are in place, and you start with the language. And then, you know I've always said you meet people where they are and you help move them forward. But the easiest solution is to start with language and to realize that all it takes, I'm going now connected to each one teach 10, all it takes is one person to say, wait a second, this isn't okay. I can't believe like this hasn't been on my radar yet, but it's on my radar now. And this is not okay, because if we're using that messaging like the 1 in 5, or we're using disorders, or we're using illness or diagnoses and labels, how is that making somebody else feel? What can I do to make this more inclusive? And what happens to the people if I'm not in the 1 to 5? Like, I still have challenges. I'm not included in this conversation. So I think the easiest thing anyone can do is to start with an audit on the language that is currently being used, and then figure out small ways to start to make some changes to those languages, and those phrases that unfortunately we've all inherited from the media. We're inundated by them.
That's true. I think self-reflection is the best way that you see what work you've been doing before. Like you might have seen people having amazing ways of projecting that. So what does not work out for you? And when you start integrating those ways, you're able to reach out to the right audience, and basically everybody will be able to relate to that idea and thought that you want to spread out. Yes. So if I were to ask you, if you had a tagline for the work that you do, what would that be?
Okay, that's a collective, right? Like this is in totality about all the work. And I feel pretty strongly that I have modeled throughout my career leading by hand, heart, and mind. And so if I had a hashtag or I had a tagline, it would be, and if I had something to inspire others to do, and it ties directly into your each one teach 10, all it takes is one person, but we're all here to be called upon. So why not me, right? Like yes, I want to be there. I want to be that person. I want to be that person for myself. I want to be that person for other people. To lead by hand, heart, and mind. So that's it. That would be my tagline.
That is so well said. I think that's everything that you've been sharing as well. That it's not just about those frameworks or programs, it's about how we show up for ourselves, for people in a very human way. And I think it's like an invitation to be that person who creates safety, models balance, and supports others and themselves, not just professionally, but personally as well.
That's it, right in a nutshell. And your hashtag each one teach 10, you don't it's not just a tagline, it's something that you live and you model and you demonstrate and you invite others to want to be a part of. So it's a
Yes.
collective experience.
Absolutely. And since I've been working on this project for now 6 and almost 7 years, I finally launched a social media page. Right now, I'm going to be posting all the stuff that I'm doing, including podcast and upcoming projects, which I have a lot to share with you about. So this felt like a lot special to me. And yes, it's all about, spreading those ripples of change
That
with
is
each.
it. Yes. And I remember we used to, while I was on Twitter, we'd always add that little ripple. You found that ripple icon, and you would add it after a hashtag. But that's it. You were about ripples of change that we all.
Keeps on
It
spreading.
starts at the center, and you ripple out, and the center is you, right?
That
All it
is so
takes is
true.
one. Yes, and then one becomes 10.
And that keeps on multiplying.
Yes, yes.
Yes. And that makes me want to ask you on a final note about this amazing conversation. If there's one message you want listeners to walk away with today, what would that be?
I mean, if I have to be succinct about it, I am going to say, and I said it previously, let's go with that idea of that ripple, that the center is you, and you've got to take care of yourself. And then that ripple, or those layers that extend outwards, and that idea of leading by hand, heart, and mind. If we all did that in our own spheres, the world would be a different place. In fact, we didn't even get into this, and I don't want to get into it at the end, but the world feels so divided, specifically online, but also in person. And that idea of civil discourse is out the window. And what can we do individually and collectively to kind of change that narrative in our own communities, and then have that ripple to help extend to others, because we're just fractured as a society right now and really divided. And I know that personally, I want to help change that for the next generation, for the current generation. And I know you do too. So that would
That
be
is
my final takeaway, I think.
Thank you for sharing that. And that really highlights that. I think the conversation today totally highlights that whether it is digital citizenship, mental health, world problems, people trying to solve them, the core is the same. Being intentional about how we show up for ourselves, each other, and creating spaces where everyone feels seen, supported, and empowered to grow. And we're not divided, but working together to the same goal that we want to achieve.
That's it. That is it. You were succinct, my friend.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Marialice, for your time and for sharing amazing ideas and, of course, experiences today, through which I feel there are a lot of life lessons to take in for me and for the audience listening today. And we've got, of course, uh, yes, comments in the chat as well. It's been a while I haven't, shown them, but yes, we have. It's the best quote, relive.
Oh, I love that. I love that. In fact, now I see that there's a blue dot by chat, but I was so focused in looking at you, I wasn't even paying attention to any chat. But that's
Same, I
wonderful.
didn't look at it as well that we're having comments, but yes,
That's
each one,
wonderful.
each 10, and the ripple.
Ah, I love that. That says
Yes,
it all. And hi,
absolutely.
Monica.
Yes, amazing. Well, thank you so much, Marialice, and thank you everyone for joining and listening to this episode. I will see you in the next one. Till then, each one teach 10.
I miss
And
you already.